Thank you so much for the invitation. I usually speak about innovation, but it's going to be very hard to do that after this fantastic presentation. The jury has a very difficult job ahead. So my goal today is to give you an insight of what a very fast-growing startup looks like, what are the keys of success behind that, and how this collaborative economy startup is shaping in a different way business models around the transport industry. First, I'd like to introduce myself. As I was introduced, I'm the current general manager for BlaBlaCar in Spain and Portugal. But what I'm at heart is actually a geek. I've been in love with technology since I was 4 years old. I discovered this magnificent machine called computer, in which you entered a command and the computer did things. And since then, I became obsessed about technology and how technology changes the way we do things. In a sense, I focused later not that much on the technology, but on the business side of it, and I became a bit of a startup addict. So since then, I've been very much focused on how to change the way we do several things. So for instance, I started working in how to innovate education using technology. Afterwards, I joined a startup that worked with big data on mobile and telco operators. This is a very successful company that is still working today. And then I started my own company. So like you, I have an entrepreneurial background, and hopefully I will be able to tell you all the mistakes that I made. For 3 years, I launched Seistero, and it was a media outlet without journalists. The whole idea was that it was user-generated content. We were very, very successful in terms of audience. We were very, very not successful in terms of revenue. So after Seistero and all the learnings that I got there, I was able to join BlaBlaCar. And I joined BlaBlaCar back in 2013 when the company, they already had a bit of a story, but they were starting to explode. So I was lucky enough to accompany the startup, the project, when it got really big. How many of you know BlaBlaCar? Would you raise your hand, please? This is super cool. When I did this with Seistero, nobody raised their hands. Just a few words about BlaBlaCar, and for those of you that don't know the company. BlaBlaCar is a very, very simple concept. The original idea is based on something that all of us have done sometimes in our life, which is, hey, I'm driving somewhere, I have empty seats on my car, let's take somebody with me and split the costs. What we've been able to do is, thanks to technology, we've created a layer of trust that allowed this very simple practice to have a complete different scale. A scale that means right now there's over 35 million users of BlaBlaCar all around the world. And this figure is growing 1.5 million each month. Roughly 12 million travelers use BlaBlaCar per quarter to move around. And this figure is doubling every year. BlaBlaCar is currently operating in 22 countries. It started in France almost 10 years ago, and I'll tell you a bit of the story afterwards. And now it's not only operating in Europe, but in countries such as India, Brazil, or Mexico. I wanted to give you a bit of an insight in how an activity that has these numbers and this exponential growth can change the habits of people and can have a real impact on how we move ourselves and how we travel. Let's think about for a second on the car, on the private car. I don't know if you knew, but 76% of the trips that we do as individuals in Europe, between 100 and 800 kilometers, are done by car. Out of those, 75% of the time, there's only one person inside of the car. This is absurd. We invented cars to move families. That's why they have 5 seats. And we turned them into individual transportation systems. Actually, the average occupancy rate of a car in Europe is 1.7 people. That's while the car is being used, because 95% of the time it's not being used. So what we aim for at BlaBlaCar is to grow and build a carpooling community that changes this. And the impact has been magnificent. From the 1.7 people per car in Europe, we moved to 2.8 people per car in the whole community. And over the last year, we've saved 1 million tons of CO2 emissions. There's lots of energy experts here, I'm not, but this is clearly just a small dent on all the work that we need to do. But seeing the exponential growth that we have on our activity and how this activity changes the habits of people, there's real promise on this trend. Now, when they asked me to give this keynote, I'm very thankful and very honored to be here. I wanted to focus a bit on you guys. And I wanted to go back in time and recall my experience in Saistedo and also focus on what are the things that make BlaBlaCar special. And what are the keys of success, or the keys to success in a company like BlaBlaCar. So we've looked a lot into that. And actually, we've defined what we call the primary colors of a startup. As you know, BlaBlaCar usually uses always 3 colors. What are the 3 main ingredients of success? Let's start with the green, with the DNA. DNA is who we are. And I'll talk a little bit about the team, the culture, and the product. Second one is more of the mental part of the brains of yourself or of your company. And it has to do with your growth strategy. How do you approach KPIs? How do you approach financing? And what's your ambition in life? How do you want to grow? And lastly, there's this part that most of you probably have, and a lot of people here. And I think it's very interesting also for big corporations, which it has to do with the spirit, the entrepreneurial spirit. It has to do with the mindset, with how you approach hard work that will be behind, and what is the passion behind you. So about the DNA of the company, let's start with the team. Most of you have presented your teams, and we have an excellent example at BlaBlaCar of how a founder team should be. There's a lot of potential investors here, and in each finance round, investors look at your team, look at your founder team, look at the team that you have below you, and they are looking for people that are complementary, that can work together, and then can create this synergy of positive growth inside of the company. In BlaBlaCar, we have one very geeky guy, which is Francis. He's the CTO. We have a very operational-focused person, which is Nicolas Brosson. And we have this visionary creative, who's Fred Mazzella, who's the founder of the company. If we talk a bit about culture, and I like these slides very much, what you see here are the 10 values that we built for the company. We built them together, all of the employees, a little bit over 3 years ago. And we built it because of one very important reason. When you're a very small team working in the same office, seeing each other every day, it's very easy to maintain culture because you see each other, you see the behaviors, you can shape how people work. But when the company starts growing fast and you start having people in different rooms, different countries, you need to be very explicit. And we decided to be explicit about our values. These values are hanging in every wall, in every office of BlaBlaCar. It's almost like a cult. Everyone knows these values by heart. And they talk about how we love innovation, how we approach test and learn, how we diffuse and encourage sharing knowledge inside of the company. They talk about how you should have always the member and trust at the center of everything you do. And they talk about how we work extremely hard, very long hours sometimes, and we need to have fun and party as hard as that. And then about the product. BlaBlaCar was born by the personal need of someone, in this case, Fred Mazzella. Fred, he's a brilliant guy. He's one of the most brilliant people I've ever known. He worked at NASA. He's amazingly smart. But he wanted to go back home for Christmas Eve to have dinner with our family 10 years ago. And the guy had forgotten to buy train tickets. So he found himself Christmas Eve, no tickets, nowhere to go home, no way to go home. He started calling his friends, nobody could pick him up. And at the end, his sister drove by, picked him up, and on the way home, he realized that all of the cars around him were completely empty. And he thought, hey, if I could match people with this need, with people driving, we could instantly create this peer-to-peer transport network that it's powered by people. So it started by personal need, and all of the employees in BlaBlaCar are actually users. We have this policy in which you can travel free by BlaBlaCar if you're an employee, and we give feedback of the service. That's one of the values: think it, build it, use it. And it's proven extremely useful, especially in the first stages of the company. About the strategy, I'm not going to bore you with a lot of details on KPIs, but I will rescue one of the values that we saw before, which is vanity, sanity, reality. We are extremely proud of having 35 million users all around the world, but that doesn't mean anything. You need to choose your right KPIs, and you need to work on those. For us, it is how many people actually travel together at the end of the day. Having 35 million people registered is pretty cool, but it doesn't work. It doesn't matter. As for financing, BlaBlaCar is quite a great example of how to finance a company. Over time, we've raised over $300 million. The company is valued over $1.5 billion. So it's one of those so-called unicorns, although I don't really like to be called that. But we've always had two things in mind. One, raise money before you need it. And two, only raise money if you have a specific goal for it. At the beginning, it was, let's roll out the service, let's prove it. Secondly, let's try a business model, because at the beginning, there was no business model behind BlaBlaCar. Now we have one, and it's very simple. When we put in contact passenger and driver, we take a part of the contribution that the passenger does to the trip. And then we were focusing on how we expand to nearby countries, including Spain, and how can we conquer the whole Europe, and now we're in a phase of growing globally. And then the global ambition. It's very easy to say, like, hey, I want to be all around the world, but it's very different to say it than to do it. And you really need to internalize that in your hiring processes. You really need to internalize that in everything that you do. For instance, BlaBlaCar has been super aggressive on expanding the footprint very soon, taking big bets, having people on the ground like me, working with complete independence in those markets. And that's something that you need to be brave to do. And lastly, as I said, I would like to speak briefly about what's the entrepreneurial spirit. This is probably the only thing that we got more or less right in Seistero, and that's what took us all the way 3 years while suffering a lot of things. The first is the mindset, and please remember this because it's super important. The only constant that you are going to face is change. That's true for startups, and that's true for big companies. You need to embrace uncertainty. You need to be prepared for that. You don't know if it's going to rain, but you can buy an umbrella. If you maybe know this guy called Thomas Edison. He invented somewhere around 1,000 patents. And this guy always said, I haven't failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that don't work. So you need to work with that mindset in mind. And then hard work is also nonsense. Okay, we all work hard. But startups sometimes take a lot of time to actually take off. BlaBlaCar actually took 5 years to get to their first 1 million users. 5 years after, it has 34 more. But it took 5 years of, at the beginning, only Fred Mazzella working on that. It took 3 years for me to bankrupt my company. But sometimes, if you are persistent enough, you will see the prize ahead. And lastly, passion. This is almost all of the employees of BlaBlaCar right now. We are 500 people. We got together last year in France. And passion is actually the fuel that will allow you to have that grit, to sustain that effort in time, and that will drive you on your future challenges. This is all I have for you guys today. I'm open to questions if any of you have, and thank you so much again for the invitation.